Hello and welcome to Politically Unstable at the Washington Times. I'm Kelly Sadler, the commentary editor, and today I'm joined by Jake Lang, who is a January 6th defendant, served, 3 years in jail?
4 years and 6 days.
4 years and 6 days here in D.C., in the D.C. penitentiary, was pardoned by President Trump, and now has a lawsuit against Christopher Wray and the FBI and the actions they may have taken on that day. Jake, I want to just get started. Why were you at the Capitol on January 6, 2021? What were your intentions? Kind of take us through the events of that day, if you will.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on. It's a blessing anytime that we can use our voice now, because that was something they tried to take from us during my entire period of incarceration. And like millions of Americans, I was extremely upset about the stolen election. And you couple that on top of the COVID lockdowns, this draconian, police state that I lived in New York City, right? So we had like this especially crazy crackdown where you couldn't go to restaurants, you couldn't do anything that I was, used to doing for my whole entire life. And so we had this pattern of tyrannical oppression, including our voices actually being taken from us in the most important sacred part about being an American.
The internet, especially if you disagreed with the COVID-19 lockdown mandates, the having to take a jab, sometimes churches were shut down. If you question the science, a lot of people were censored off of the internet at that time. So when you say our voices were taken away, they definitely were during that era.
So 100%, they snowballed, right? This circumstance. And then President Trump, our greatest president of our generation, in his, final moments in power, tells us to come into protest, to come and stand with him, to, try to tell our elected officials, hey, let's get a recount. Let's send this back to the state legislator. He's used the words peacefully and patriotically. So me and a million other brave American patriots showed up at the Capitol to do just that, to have our voice heard, to redress a grievance with our government. They had taken what was a sacred, human right of an American, our vote from us. And we wanted to make sure that our elected officials knew that we wouldn't stand for that we were revoking our consent there. And as history shows, right, the Capitol Police turned their weapons on an unarmed crowd of American citizens. And this was not a young crowd. We had a lot of Vietnam War veterans there, elderly people, families and whatnot. And 4 people ended up losing their lives to police brutality that day. Defenseless, unarmed Americans exercising their First Amendment right.
So what did you do exactly on that day? How did you get arrested? Take us through the story.
January 6th was a day where I just, showed up because I love my country. And from the ellipse where President Trump was speaking, we walked down Pennsylvania Avenue. By the time we got down there was already some dynamic conflicts that were happening, that all of the people that were already at, the Trump speech and then, hundreds of thousands that had arrived, we had no idea that there were already, police officers that had, basically got into some confrontations with the protesters. So we walked in blind, right? We walked in thinking there's going to be some speakers there because there were scheduled speakers that were happening that day, like permitted speakers. We thought that there was just going to be kind of like, a Trump rally part 2 just outside the Capitol. Meanwhile, all of a sudden, tear gas, concussion grenades start getting lobbed into the middle of the crowd that I'm standing in. People are panicking. Women are being shot with rubber bullets and with pepper ball bullets. And these are high velocity ammunition rounds. And I actually physically saw with my own eyes people's holes in their faces. The rubber bullets pierced through their cheeks. And so we were just dropped into a war zone that we didn't want to create, that we didn't start. And one of the things that I say proudly is that, we're Americans, we're not going to be bullied, regardless of the circumstances. That's the people's house. We had a right to redress a grievance there. And just because, these Nancy Pelosi stormtroopers, right, they were like told by her, we don't want the National Guard. We want our Capitol Police officers that we have kind of this say-so over. If we tell them to start lobbing munitions into a crowd, they're going to listen to us. The National Guard would never do that. And so we found ourselves, myself, inside of a absolute melee, having to defend our own lives and defend our country versus this tyrannical oppression. And, it's unfortunate people lost their lives, but at the end of the day, the optics of that day, which is something I like to state because, we have these two different narratives of January 6th, the Fedsurrection, right? The FBI involvement, but you also have this American spirit, this 1776 American spirit, when it's time to stand up, when you're being bullied, when you're being disenfranchised, when your voice is stolen from you, not to cower, not to run to the defense of your country, to run to the defense of women like Roseanne Boyland, who died in my arms, and Ashley Babbitt, who was murdered and shot in the throat by Lieutenant Officer Michael Byrd, who is still walking around free, by the way, right now, after being promoted by the Biden administration. So I do like to also give that other frame of reference about January 6th, that it was a proud day to be an American, to stand up.
So when did you get arrested?
This is incredible. And you guys, we're 10 months into Trump's administration now. And so people are going to be, a little bit caught off by this. I was arrested 10 days into Biden administration, January 16th. So already we're seeing mass arrests happening to the January 6ers. And one of the things that we like to poise to the current DOJ, Pam Bondi, we have 3 arrests now, John Bolton. We have a few different Democrat, tyrannical, treasonous people that have been arrested right now. But there were already hundreds. By this time in Biden's administration, hundreds of Americans had their door kicked in by the FBI, were raided and were dragged off to the gulag without any due process. So, we like to use these kind of comparison moments to tell you, hey, Pam Bondi, hey, Department of Justice, let's get it.
Were you arrested after you left the Capitol, after you left Washington, D.C. and went back to New York, or were you arrested here in Washington, D.C.?
I was arrested back in New York. I actually left miraculously. I was very injured on January 6th. I got my head split open by a baton, required stitches. I got my foot shot by a rubber bullet. I wasn't able to walk towards the end of the day. And actually, I call my Patriot Angels, 2 men drove me from D.C. all the way back to New York because my bus that I came on left. So I was back laid up basically at my home on crutches, and I was limping back from church, and the FBI literally, and I'm not joking about this, literally about 15 to 20 FBI vans, fully auto weapons, red dot beams trained on me, right? I don't have no criminal record. I was 25 years old when they arrested me. And they arrested me in my hometown in upstate New York and dragged me off to the Washington, D.C. gulag. And that is a story that we'll get into now, but I never thought once in my life going to the Capitol on January 6th that my family, my community, and, my own personal liberty would ever be put at stake.
So were you given a trial and were you convicted? Did you plead guilty? Did you plead not guilty? What happened to the due process rights that you're afforded as an American?
I was never given a trial. I would never even consider pleading guilty because inside the guilty pleas were clauses that basically blamed President Trump. They were using it as a weaponized ploy to try to build a case, a RICO case, right? The Jan 6ers down here, Oath Keepers and Proud Boys middle level, President Trump at the top, to build like a criminal terrorist organization that they tried to use to frame President Trump to remove him from being able to run. So I knew my guilty plea would possibly jeopardize the president from being able to run in 2024. So I stuck it out. 4 years, 6 days. 1,467 days. I never had a trial. 900 of those days were in solitary confinement. They moved me from prison to prison, putting me in solitary, sometimes even housing me with MS-13 because I was labeled a domestic terrorist. So the only people that I could live with were other domestic terrorists, ISIS members. I did multiple months alone in a prison cell, me and an ISIS member living together, me and the MS-13 shot caller, which is the head of the criminal organization. 6'3", tattooed up, head to toe. And the guards and the administration had put me in these life-threatening situations because inmates often die in a prison cell sometimes when you're with another inmate and you have a difference or whatnot. And this person is, the MS-13 guy had admittedly killed over a dozen people. So they put me in a prison cell with this man during Trump's run. This was right at the end when he's talking about immigration. And me and this man are having arguments about his family, the few of his illegal immigrant family from El Salvador that are there. And I'm saying, yeah, they should be deported. And so we're getting into arguments. And they purposely had staged these very violent scenarios to try to silence me because I was doing interviews. The little hour or two a day that I got out of my cell to use the phone, I was able to come on to Newsmax sometimes, even to speak sometimes to Washington Times here, which was such a blessing, this platform. Thank you guys, all the administration here and the leadership, because we were able to get out our voice. That really enraged the Biden administration, and they tried to shut it down at every angle, even putting me in solitary for years.
So when did you get released? Was it after President Trump's pardon?
Oh, now you're talking about a historical, beautiful moment here. This is a time to celebrate, talking about the pardons and the release. After all those years in prison, facing personally, I was going to be sentenced if I was ever found guilty. They had told me to 25 to 30 years. That's legitimate time. I was facing hundreds of years with the charges that they alleged against me, but legitimately they were seeking that amount of time for me. And so for my family to know at the end of this tunnel was finally a glimpse of light. President Trump won. We had a promise that he had campaigned on, right? 3 things: drill, baby, drill, seal the border, and free the J6ers. And so it was an overjoying moment. It was, I like to explain it like this. It was literally like a biblical deliverance moment, right? A Moses parting the Red Sea, Joseph emerging from prison. I prayed for this moment for many years, every night on my knees, crying out to God, even sometimes doing hunger strikes. I did a 12-day hunger strike at one point because they'd removed me from ability to speak to my family and do the interviews in the media to fight for our cause. And so these are times that I suffered for, thinking about, like, deeply praying to deliver me. God, Jesus, my Lord, deliver me from this evil. And that moment that Donald Trump was inaugurated, he sat on that big stage in front of, millions of people, and he signed the pardons right then and there. It took 24 hours later for the U.S. Marshals actually had to be sent in to the D.C. jail, the D.C. gulag, the swamp creatures. They had their talons linked into us, and they did not want to let us go. So Donald Trump had to send the U.S. Marshals in there. Actually, I had to tweet at Elon Musk from my prison cell, and he responded. I said, I was pardoned over, because this was the next day, yesterday, and they're still not letting us go. Elon, can you help us? Because he said he was trying to manage the situation, and he tweeted back. He said, we're on it right now, Jake. So Elon Musk had to get involved. The U.S. Marshals had to be sent in. But that moment of deliverance, walking out to the loving arms of my fiance, my father, Ned Lang, my mother, Sari Lang, and thousands of supporters with the beard, and I had on the prison gray sweatsuit, and it was a January freezing cold, but the warmth and all the cameras and everything, and I had my Bible in my hand. I'm like, freedom. It was beautiful. It was like a little mini Nelson Mandela moment for American history.
How many other J6ers were in prison with you?
At that time, there was about 30 of us left in the D.C. gulag, and they had staggered our releases. I walked out with 2 young men like myself who had been incarcerated for years, and their family were waiting for them. And we walked out singing the national anthem. And our supporters saw us and carrying these big garbage bags and these gray sweatsuits. And they were like, did you guys just get released? Because the vans dropped us off down the street away from the crowd of thousands of people. And we came walking towards the crowd singing the national anthem. And it was just like this moment. America voted for that visual. When they pulled the lever for President Trump, you guys had voted for that visual of freedom. And this is like the word picture of American freedom being restored. It was beautiful.
Well, Jay, the mainstream media and the legacy media has a completely different story of what happened on January 6th. In the fact that it was terrorism, it was domestic violence, it was an insurrection trying to overthrow the United States government. There was a January 6th committee that was headed by Liz Cheney that painted a narrative to the American public that pardoning the J6ers would be a huge crime, for that Donald Trump shouldn't do it. What do you say to all of that? And then let's talk about the lawsuit that you've just filed.
One of the biggest talking points that we can deliver right now is that the American people were doing our duty to actually stand up for our democratic process, right? It was those people who had stolen the election, who had taken and rigged and obfuscated the American people's will. And we were doing what we, had been given to us by God to do, which was to stand up for our constitutional republic, for the democratic process. So those who say we were trying to pause, or disrupt the normal democratic process or in any way influence the democratic process, that is projection from the Democrats, what they were doing to us with the stolen election. And that January 6th Select Committee basically sold that in mass. I believe I read the number 65 million Americans tuned into that propaganda stunt ran by the head of CBS, right? All 13 major cable news networks and satellite networks carried it. They never once brought a single January 6th prisoner or family member or attorney, right, there to give our side of the story. So it was a one-sided propaganda piece. And in fact, I didn't even have my trial yet, and a lot of Jan 6ers didn't. It completely tainted our jury pools. Liz Cheney was found literally influencing Cassidy Hutchinson to coach her in how she was supposed to testify. When the committee was over, they deleted all of the files and the evidence. They committed so many different felonies that they told us that we were committing, mainly obstruction of Congress. They were obstructing this new congressional subcommittee headed up by Representative Loudermilk from doing their job by deleting evidence, which is the exact smaller piece of the 20-year felony charge I'm talking about, 1512 obstruction of Congress. What you have to do to be guilty of that is to delete files or rip up paperwork, which is exactly what the January 6th Select Committee did, obfuscating the truth from the American people. So they're guilty of everything that they say we are.
So you're working with Congressman Loudermilk, who works under Jim Jordan in the Judiciary Committee. They have launched another J6 committee to figure out what exactly happened with the Cheney-Pelosi J6, where all those records went. And so tell us a little bit about what you're working on in his office, what you hope to find. And then there's been reports that have been disseminated by Kash Patel, who's going through the FBI headquarters right now and trying to make heads or tails of what went on. This was the biggest investigation in DOJ history, launched under Biden into the J6ers and rounding them up and making the arrests and making the prosecutions. So he said that there was as many as over 250 not uniformed FBI officers.
Yeah, undercover
at the Capitol, perhaps instigating things. We don't know that much that far. We know that Christopher Wray denied those reports. So what is Loudermilk trying to come at, and what are you trying to do with your personal suit?
So basically we have congressional testimony from Christopher Wray, right, years ago, saying that he has no knowledge of any undercover agents, at January 6th on Capitol grounds in any way there. And Kash Patel has now unearthed that. So he lied straight to Congress and the American people. And he lied to the grand juries that indicted us. Don't you think the grand juries that wanted to, they were presented evidence, would want to know, hey, this man actually had a weapon handed to him by an FBI agent, or this person had a door open to them, or a window was smashed by this FBI agent that, this person walked through. That is exculpatory evidence. It can help exonerate a person. They hid it from the grand juries. They hid it from our criminal juries to actually decide our fate, guilty or not guilty. It's illegal. That's called a Brady violation. And so they sent people to prison for years under false pretenses. And that's what that $25 million lawsuit we just filed on Christopher Wray is a basis of. And we're working with Representative Loudermilk and the entire Trump administration to give them the evidence that they're going to need about the murder of Roseanne Boyland, which was covered up. They said that she died of a methamphetamine overdose at the Capitol. I personally watched her being beaten by Officer Lila Morris, MPD officer, murderer, beat this woman unconscious while she was on the ground. They chemically sprayed her when she was unconscious on the ground with CS gas and tear gas. They basically had, through trampling feeding her and chemically inducing this state of her unconsciousness, murdered her. And so there's going to be days set aside for investigation into Ashley Babbitt, investigation into Roseanne Boylan, investigation into the FBI agent, investigation into the J6 Select Committee. So we're working through all the different channels. The January 6th communities, this big, vibrant, beautiful group of people that are all banded together under persecution. And we've had to basically formulate organizations, fundraisers, which my organizations and the people that I head up have, done a brilliant job with while I was in prison. I tasked them, hey, let's build this website. Hey, let's make this documentary. And so we're bringing all these resources that we've gathered for years, the prisoners' notes, right? All of the grievances they filed with the D.C. jail. Our food tastes like soap. There's, there's black mold in the ceiling vents, all these grievances, legal grievances, compiling them to hand off to the new subcommittee so that they can get a true factual understanding and transparent understanding of January 6th. So these lawsuits and the new committee are all conglomerating to see what we're basically looking at as a restoration of justice, an ending of the weaponization, pushing against the American people, finding the man and then finding the crime. That's not the American way of justice. And so I pray that this restores that beacon of, that beautiful beacon of light that we've had in American justice. Is historically just been, the Lady Justice has been blind. And this is a chance for us all the Americans who saw the way that they contrived charges on people, withheld due process on us. I believe this is going to be the turning point where we're making American jurisprudence great again.
So what do you say to the people who do believe that this was organized by the Oath Keepers, that there was a heavy level of white supremacy in this movement, that are you a white supremacist? Because I'm sure there's people in the audience that are wondering about that.
No, I don't think any Jan 6er is a white supremacist that I've ever met. I have met all of these men, great men of character, school teachers, Army Rangers, U.S. Marines, a ton of U.S. Marines, great people. And a lot of them were black that were with us in the D.C. jail. The Oath Keepers have multiple black members in their ranks, and they were seen doing no acts of violence. In fact, there are multiple videos that I've seen with my own eyes in their discovery. The Oath Keepers form kind of like a semicircle around a police officer and escort them out, in a place in the Capitol that was maybe a contentious area where they were shouting at each other. Oath Keepers were providing protection for different Capitol police officers, including the lying celebrity cop, Harry Dunn, that big Capitol police officer that lies through his teeth. The Oath Keepers were, in fact, putting a wall of protection between the protesters and that police officer, which was completely turned around in their trial, lied about. They actually edited that video evidence in the J6 committee. That's another huge crime that they did, and they did it in their trial. So I only saw amazing American patriots. In fact, the man that I saved his life, Philip Anderson, is a black man. And when Roseanne Boylan died in my arms, I had to move my efforts over to Philip, and I didn't see color at that point. I saw an American patriot, a brother of mine, and I picked him up. He was unconscious. He was being beaten to death by the police. He credits me publicly with saving his life. And, I credit God with putting me in the right place at the right time. But, these were every shade, creed, color, and amazing American was there. I had Asian American grandmas inside that tunnel with me, standing side by side with me against tyranny. We had Spanish Americans, we had Black Americans. And so I don't believe that any of the Jan 6ers that I did prison time with, and I've been to almost every prison, they moved me 17 times. I never heard any type of rhetoric that was against any individual group of Americans. All I knew was they didn't like the Democrats because the Democrats were behind it. If you want to call the Jan 6ers anything, maybe we're a little biased against the Democrat regime that robbed us of our lives, but not against any single group.
So what's ahead for you?
Oh, we are so blessed. God is just opening up doors in my life and the January 6ers' life. I'm running for United States Senate now in the great state of Florida to replace Marco Rubio. My candidacy is a symbol of being able to overcome adversity. The American spirit, right? The American dream, to go from a prison cell as a political prisoner, persecuted by your government, to becoming one of the people that can make a change in government, to end that uniparty, deep state, feckless leadership that we've seen in the United States Senate from the Republicans forever. I mean, we have Mitch McConnell, who's just been absolutely limp. Both physically, but also in his integrity, I believe. The American people, that doesn't represent the new Republican MAGA party, right? We have a strong firebrand movement that has a lot of energy behind it. And I don't know if we can name a single United States senator that encapsulates that. And so that's my dream. That's my goal, to bring that and to be a Trump loyalist. We need people in the United States Senate that say, the mandate of the American people was President Trump's agenda. And I want to make sure that my constituency makes that promise. We deliver upon it. President Trump is your president. We overwhelmingly popular vote voted it. Now we need the legislative branch to bring in and usher in that agenda alongside President Trump. So you will get that, from me and from any J6er, 100%. We're loyal.
Are all the J6ers now out of jail and out of legal scrutiny?
We have a continued weaponization, unfortunately. We have a couple J6ers that have been left behind. My friend Edward Kelly, U.S. Marine, I did 2 weeks of solitary confinement with him, a devout Christian, just got sentenced to life in prison. When all the Jan 6ers are being rounded up, he made a list of the FBI agents that were breaking in doors and attacking Americans. And they took that list, they twisted, perverted it, just like they did the Gretchen Whitmer, kidnapping plot, where they embedded people. They took it and completely framed him. And now he's serving a life sentence in prison in federal maximum security penitentiary in California. So we have to get a pardon for Edward Kelly. We have another J6 patriot, Dan Wilson, who's been left behind. He was a man that had a felony from 30 years ago when he was a kid. And then when they raided his home for January 6th, they found gun in his garage. So they charged him with a federal weapons crime. Hunter Biden doesn't have to go to prison, right? But Dan Wilson is serving a 5-year sentence from fruit of the poisonous tree. This is what we basically, nicknamed all of the DOJ's action, because they came at us, the January 6ers, under false pretenses with a complete, weaponization. So any charges related to or stemming from January 6th are completely bogus and need to be thrown out. We also are facing a little bit of legal trouble in the civil lawsuits with the new DOJ. The Proud Boys lawsuit is a $100 million lawsuit, beautifully put together. The 5 Proud Boys that were convicted of seditious conspiracy, which was complete bogus, filed a $100 million lawsuit. The DOJ has rigorously, the new DOJ, Pam Bondi's DOJ, has rigorously opposed this. And so we're getting a little bit of mixed signals right now from the Trump administration. We're looking for some clarity on that, because they did settle with the Ashley Babbitt $5 million wrongful death lawsuit, right? Which showed, some type of arbitration or willingness to cooperate and to make amends for, why did President Trump and the DOJ fire every FBI agent that raided our homes and every federal prosecutor that bloodthirstily and viciously went after us? If there wasn't something wrong with those prosecutions, then why did they do those things? Well, obviously, and pardon us on top of that, we have these proofs that obviously there was wrongdoing that happened to us. So why then would we not deserve restitution for years of solitary confinement, family businesses destroyed, generational family homes they had to move out of? They became bankrupt, right? Had to sell it off, mortgaged out, and had to sell off their homes. These are tangible, painful experiences that 1,600 Americans went through. And the Trump administration has in many ways acknowledged this by firing the prosecutors, firing the FBI agents, pardoning us. So why the rigorous opposition to some of our lawsuits? I'm looking for more clarity on that. And I pray that as these lawsuits do continue to go down the road, that we will see some settlements happening where they say, instead of, bringing this to the end of it through, civil jury trials or civil disputes, that maybe we'll get a settlement. And so those are some of the battles that are ongoing right now, getting some pardons. We also have a fellow political prisoner, Tina Peters, who I consider a Jan 6 type of political prisoner because she's an election integrity whistleblower. And I have championed her cause. I've talked to her many times on my ex profile, Jake Lang, J6. I have a video interview I did with her from her prison cell recently before she was moved. And she's another one that needs a pardon. She's another victim of weaponization of Democrat, Marxist perversion of the law code to punish political enemies. So we have a few people that we're still really fighting hard for. And I would love to see, justice be met in all of our circumstances.
Well, Jake, thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. And we look forward to covering Loudermilk's committee, what he uncovers in terms of the truth. And as well as, what gets released and declassified from the FBI under Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. I think there's a lot of story here that went untold. And I think that a lot of us are seeking the truth of what really happened that day. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much. God bless you, Kelly.
You too.